Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are doing Our Lives, Beginnings, and Always, the Derek DLC. So let's get started. I'm going to show you some things, but first I'm going to thank all 177 subscribers I have now. Thank you so much for subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it if you could go to my Patreon account and become a Patreon contributing member. All the funds, membership funds that go in there go directly to charity. I don't see a penny of it. It just goes to a charity that I choose from for it to go to, a worthy charity. And for those of you who want to receive copies of uncensored videos, you must join the $9 tier or the $25 tier. Those two are set up for adult content. The $3 tier is not for adult content. It is a budget tier, but it is not meant for adult content. And once you become a member, I will announce your name at the end of every video. And for those of you who want to see the hero route, you still have until the end of the year. If you join up, I would like to see 5 of you viewers or subscribers become members on my $9 tier. And once I see 5 of you members on there, I will do the hero route on the original Camp Buggy game, of course. And you can find the link to my Patreon within the description area just below the video. So, with that in mind, let's get started. There we go, full screen. And we're already ready to load, so let's do that. Click this one. Oops. Did I click the wrong one? No, I guess not. Maybe, I don't know. Let's see. Okay. Okay, well, this is what I wanted to show you anyway. To get to directly to the rest of the part of the Derek DLC, you'll have to come to here and then see this arrow over here to the right. You click that and it gives you the information here about the Derek's DLC. I'm not going to read it. It's a lot to read there. But for those of you who have the game and you bought the DLC for Derek, I just wanted to show you this so you understand how to play it. So now we have the first 5 moments of Derek at 13, and of course our MC is our main character is also 13. So this is how we get to eventually romancing Derek and eventually even marrying him. So at least this is the start part of it. There's more late in some of the other steps that we'll view later on. I'm going to do the soiree on the last one I do is I'm gonna say this for the last one, because that is the dating. When we get to date him, we get to date Derek. But in the meantime, we're gonna start with this one. We're gonna go do responsible. And I'm gonna grab some water real quick. The pool of Derek's condo complex was a perfect setting for a late morning outing. It was early enough that the day hadn't yet reached its hottest. The air still held a crispness of morning, despite its pleasantness. Yeah, I think that's it. Pleasantness. Only you and Derek were there. Of course, given the location of the ocean, maybe everyone else who felt like waterside fun was at the beach. You usually were. The warm roughness of tiles felt odd on your bare feet. Did I skip something? Okay. Nope, I guess not. Alright. The warm roughness of of tiles felt odd on your bare feet. As you walked further into the pool area, there was no sand to squash between your toes, or sharp shells to avoid. You surveyed the area while Derek finished putting his stuff away on a chair. The chlorine was sharp in your senses. The entire space was so orderly. Lounge chairs set in neat rows, umbrellas spaced out uniformly. The depth of the pool was marked out in clear text along the sides. Every single element was initially and expertly crafted to be convenient for its human visitors. It was extremely different from the wild mistress of the sea. Okay, what do we choose here? I'm gonna go with number 3. You like both the pool and the beach about the same. Both had their good points. You were up for today's adventure to be something different from your typical day-to-day options. This had been Derek's plan. He let you know about it ahead of time so you could be dressed for the occasion. Let's see. You wore swim trunks. Yeah. And I don't need a shirt or anything, so I'm just gonna put you were comfortable in that. Your swimming gear was familiar even if the pool wasn't. you felt prepared. Here's our boy, Derek. Derek bounced up to you on his own swim, in his own swim trunks. Flagler really ignoring the no running signs. Fragrantly ignoring the no running signs in the enthusiasm.
Okay.
Watch, I'm gonna do a cannonball. As soon as he knew he had your attention, he took off and to the deep end of the pool. He built up speed and then leapt into the water. His curled up body created a huge splash on impact. Let's see, what would I put here? I think, the last one, you cheered. Go Derek. Even though he couldn't hear you from the bottom of the pool, you celebrated the show. He stayed under for a while longer. He touched the pool's bottom before he kicked himself back upward. When Derek's head popped out of the water, he swam to the edge of the pool and propped himself up with a grin. He watched you expectantly. Let's see. You jumped in the pool. Like Derek, you gave yourself a bit of a running start. You reached the end, took a deep breath, and leapt as far as you could. Frigid water burst around you, feet first, but soon covering you entirely. You sunk lower into the depths and began to kick. You breached the surface and sucked in the fresh air. You noticed two things. One, that the water wasn't actually freezing when you got used to it. And two, that Derek was clapping for you.
Nice!
You got some serious airtime. I'd give it a 10 out of 10. Oh, thanks, Derek. As you enjoyed the moment, your thoughts fell back to how you'd gotten here. Last night, Derek had called with a different sort of request. You remembered that his voice had been a mix of nerves and hope. He had a favor to ask, very unexpected for him. Derek's mom needed him to watch his little brothers in the afternoon. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but that was part of his problem. Lately, he had feared that his sports skills weren't as sharp as he wanted them to be. He hadn't been able to practice soccer or football without the distraction of keeping an eye on his brothers. His ideal to fix this had been to ask for your help watching the kids. If you agreed to go to the park with him, and his brothers, then you could manage his brothers while he had a chance to focus on practice. That's how he explained it. Yeah, sure, I'll watch the kids. You said yes, and your moms had been more than happy to let you spend the day playing support for Derek. They said it would be a good opportunity to take on some more responsibility. Gee, thanks, moms. To sweeten the deal, Derek suggested that you come by early so that you both could hit the pool. Nicholas would be sleeping in, and George could spend some one-on-one time with Miss Suarez. Okay, so we know that Nicholas and George are his two brothers. And we'll get to see them more in this video. So far the plan had worked out. Ma dropped you off about 15 minutes ago, and both of Derek's brothers were fully occupied. Miss Suarez and George were back in the condo, putting together 800 pieces of puzzle on the kitchen counter while Nicholas snoozed on the couch. You had time to kick back before the moment came to be in charge of small children. A sloshing sound pulled you back to the present. Derek had climbed out of the pool. I'm gonna jump again. Wanna join? Yeah, sure, let's go. You copied Derek's exit from the pool. It took arm strength and caution not to scrape yourself on the texture of the concrete. There was another choice in there. No. Okay. Yeah, let's go. Alright. Okay. Now you read this part. Once on solid ground, you reversed away from the edge to give yourself enough space for a good jump. That's the one thing I like about this game, is that you can go back and change what you wanted to say and go back to different moments in the game. Some games you can't do that. I mean, you can't really do that in Camp Buddy unless you got it saved. Unless you got the moment saved. Poised to go, you and Derek made eye contact. He leaned forward, balancing on the balls of his feet.
No worries.
I've already done one. It's your turn. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is the one I was thinking about. It has multiple options here, but since we have a crush on Derek at this point, I'm gonna do this. You offered your hand to Derek so you could jump at the same time. Aw, he's blushing. Oh. Derek accepted your hand eagerly, and you ran towards the pool together.
Whoa!
You leapt and failed your legs for a split second, Derek lifted your arms into the air and kicked a foot out before you landed in the water. You stretched out and reached up towards the surface, parting your arms to pedal over to dry ground. Derek was laughing boisterously. I think that's the word for it. It was his turn next. By the curve in his grin and the lift of his chin, he looked to be in a mood to impress. His eyebrows drew together in a deep furrow as he considered his launch. Derek took a few bouncing steps to the edge, jumped up, and tucked his body in. Unlike his previous cannonball, the energy went into a spin and he flipped, making a full rotation before he crashed through the surface. The water droplets from the splash dazzled you as they exploded out from his impact. He swam under the water and only came back to the surface after he reached the wall of the pool. He snaked his hands up to the top of the tiles and pushed himself up so that his hips were even with the edge. He twisted and practically rolled out of the pool from there. You're up. Okay. We already did that one, so you want to do something different, I guess. Let's do a backflip. You backflipped into the pool. You planted your feet slowly at the edge of the pool, not facing the water. You bent your legs and prepared. You swung your arms back until, like a pendulum, you swung them forward. The moment your hand passed your knees, you jumped backwards. You tucked your body in tight as you turned all the way around before you hit the water.
Whoa!
That was awesome. You kept switching back and forth, trending off between silly jumps and then more impressive tricks. Okay. Yeah, past something. From watching Derek's well-practiced dives to performing your own jumps, there was never a boring second. After several laps, Derek called a break time, and you took a breather at the back stairs to the pool. You waited for your strained heart rate to even out from all the exertion. After a pause of silence, Derek spoke up. He pulled his fist to his cheek in thought, squishing his face slightly.
So,
Hey, I probably should have asked before, but have you ever babysit somebody before? No. Well, there was that time that we were with Shiloh alone with Shiloh for a while until our sister Elizabeth came. Let's see. Let's see. I'm gonna pick the second one. No, but how hard could watching a couple of kids be? Derek snorted and shook his head. Well, with both of us, it probably won't be too bad keeping everything together. But I'll tell you, when it's a 2-on-1 game, it's rough. Let's see. I think this one right here. You were prepared for it to be a pain, but would do it anyway for Derek. This wouldn't rank in your top 10 days of summer vacation, but Derek was worth some hassle. After that interlude, you both continued to enjoy yourselves and your freedom until a little beeping alarm went off. At that time, he made his way to the lounge chair with his stuff and dug out a small portable clock. It buzzed until he found the stop button. Derek checked the time and narrowed his eyes at the glowing red numbers. He shot you a thumbs up.
Let's go.
Let's go up. You helped him gather the towels, grabbed the rest of the stuff, and then tried to dip as little as possible while rushing through the halls of the complex. Tried to drip as little as possible while rushing through the halls of the complex. When you reached his apartment, he dumped everything in his arms on the ground and scrambled to find his key. Just give me a second. I don't want to knock or anything in case Nicholas is still asleep. He finally sped his soccer ball keychain and snatched up his keys from where they were tangled in his towel. He inserted the key into the lock and both of you shuffled inside the Sawyer's home. Three heads swerved to face the two of you, gazes being drawn to the bundles of neon towels coming in. Miss Sawyers and George were sitting on bar stools while Nicholas perched on the counter itself. With an excited grin, they were working on a puzzle. On your left, Derek leaned closer and spoke under his breath.
I figured.
He's awake.
Derek's back!
Yeah, that's pretty loud, huh? Quick as a blink, Nicholas scrambled on his hands and feet and zipped across the black marble of the counter. Tiny cardboard puzzle pieces scattered.
Ah!
Nicholas, the puzzle. Despite George's frustration, the little whirlwind didn't seem to hear. He was on a mission to reach his bigger brother, not even stopping when he hit the end of the counter. Nicholas scrambled off the edge, and Derek instinctively moved forward with a gasp, dropping all of his pool stuff except for the towel wrapped around him. Miss Soros caught Nicholas with her forearms, hooking his chest, snatching him from mid-air. Oof. She hugged her son, holding him securely against her body. A chorus of revealed sighs filled the room. Nicholas still paid no mind to his trail of disasters and began to squirm. He just wanted down already. Derek took another few steps forward, making his way over to the scene. Miss Soros carefully held Nicholas out, her hands under his armpits, and safely set him down on his feet. This kid needs to be more careful. I mean, he could hurt himself. He's probably like the youngest one in the family. But he needs to be more careful. Nicholas immediately wrapped his arms around Derek's legs. Derek chuckled while tugging at his towel so Nicholas wouldn't pull it off. Hold on, Nico. You're gonna get wet. Nicholas giggled mischievously and snuggled closer. Derek snuck a quick peek over his shoulder back at you and shrugged. Just as warned, Nicholas now had a damp splotch on his shirt. Let's see, what do we choose here? I think I'm gonna do this. Hi everybody.
Welcome.
Hello, welcome Chippy. George hummed something that could have been a greeting as he frowned at what remained of the puzzle. It was more than Nicholas, who gave no response at all.
Well.
Miss Ura's tone was warm with a certain amount of humor in it. She rubbed her hands together and stood up. Derek and Chippy are in charge now. Make sure to listen to them. George sourly picked at the puzzle pieces, but gave a grumbled noise to stifle he had heard. I'm going to head off to my appointment. She went to gather some things, officially putting you and Derek in charge. But there wasn't 1 second to settle into your new position. We're going swimming? Nicholas looked up and stared with a huge shiny eyes. Derek reflexively stiffened how he would escape the puppy dog look. Derek's eyebrows creased, a small sign of nerves compared to the smooth, placing sound of his voice. No, even better. He leaned down and lowered his voice like he was about to share a secret.
I've got a plan.
We're going to the park. Nicholas instinctively frowned. He wasn't convinced by Derek's act. He grabbed at Derek's tail. You were swimming. Yeah, but I'm not anymore. I'm going to the park. You can come with me.
No!
Jeez. He is a little brat, ain't he? The littlest Sarah's whined and stopped his foot. His hands balled up around the neon fabric harshly enough he almost took the towel from Derek. I want to go to the pool. I want to see Chippy's swimsuit. What? Derek's jaw dropped. Neither of you were prepared for that one. Did you hear Nicholas right? You looked down at yourself, currently wrapped in a bright fuzzy towel. You switched your gaze to Derek's youngest brother, your brain trying to make sense of what was happening. Why would you want that? Why does Nicholas want anything? George rolled his eyes and continued mumbling into the counter. It was obvious to him, and he couldn't believe the rest of you were taking so long to catch up. Because Derek does. Let's see. You felt stunned. Yeah, okay. Derek narrowed his eyes and whispered harshly.
Seriously?
Nicholas, George, you're gonna put me into an early grave. He took a deep breath as he stared at the ceiling. It took him a moment to face you. His voice was firm for someone at his level of embarrassment. I must have said something about hoping you'd remember to bring your swimsuit. Oh, hoping you'd remember to bring your swimsuit. I was excited for us to be able to swim, so I did want you to have one. Nicholas does not actually want to see you in a swimsuit. He doesn't even know why he'd want that. He's just saying stuff. You ran the explanation over your head a couple times. Derek seemed sincere, and it definitely made the whole thing less shocking. You snuck another look at Nicholas. He had crossed his arms high on his chest and squished his neck down far enough to rest his chin on his waist. I want to go swimming. His pout intensified when he said it again. He was very angry. He was a very angry little baby. Derek tilted back on his heels, once again driven to look at the ceiling by the strain of this kid. You glanced up there yourself without thinking about it. It was a calm white color with a few light fixtures. When you squinted, you noticed something small and green. It appeared to one of those sticky hands for kids. Was this another present from the youngest Soares? You turned back into Derek. He appeared to have made a decision. Alright, I promise that you can go swimming too, but only after the park. We'll go to the pool as soon as we come back. With the promise officially made, Nicholas lit up. He snatched up one of Derek's hands.
Let's go!
Let's go. We gotta get to the park so I can swim. While Nicholas celebrated, Derek closed his eyes for some of the worried creases on his face smoothed out. Derek, there's lunch packed in the fridge. Dad will be back before dinner.
I gotcha.
Gotcha. Thanks, Mom.
Have a good one.
Miss Soares waved and collected the last of her things. Her purse off the side of the table. She ruffled George's hair on her way out. You and Derek were alone with the kids. Oh, we should really stop leaving puddles everywhere. He gestured at the drops of water pooling at his feet. Good idea. You and Derek took turns changing. You went first while you could faintly hear Derek impressing on his brothers to listen to you too. He must have convinced them to behave for now, as neither George nor Nicholas acted up when Derek took his turn drying off and clothing himself. Can you get our lunch from the fridge? I'm gonna pack my gear. No problem. You walked casually to the kitchen. George hadn't moved from his bar stool even once since you'd gotten back. Meanwhile, Nicholas followed Derek like a posseed shadow that was even more energetic than the original. He zipped around occasionally trying to place things in Derek's backpack for him. So far, Derek had said no to the rubber duck, but he had agreed to bring an extra pair of socks that Nicholas had determined were absolutely necessary.
Okay.
Okay, got everything. Derek returned with a backpack in one hand and Nicholas's small hand in the other. We're going, George. Ready, Chippy? I'm pretty sure.
Sure.
He pushed away from the counter and finally hopped off his chair with the enthusiasm of a plank of wood. We're going. Derek hid his smile at Nicholas's echo and ushered everyone outside. He locked the condo behind him, and you began to trip to the nearby park. The park for Sarah's boys was the park for your family. Their condo complex was only a short distance from the public outdoor recreational area your mom sometimes drove you to. It was still a beautiful day outside and had only gotten a few degrees warmer from your morning swim. The field was bustling with other groups of people enjoying themselves. Derek led the way to a wide open part of the grass that no one else was using. He stopped in the middle of the field and turning 180 degrees to face the little boys behind him. He shrugged his backpack off of his shoulders and dropped it on the ground. He kneeled down to root around inside of it. George and Nicholas waited in place for their brother. Derek gathered a couple of things in his arms before pushing off the ground with his knee to get up again. He held a football in his left hand and a soccer ball in his right. All right, Nicholas, George, I've got to practice, but you can too. Which one do you want?
Okay.
Football. Real ball? You raised your eyebrow at their shouts. Derek leaned over to you and whispered with a laugh. He means a soccer ball. It's real because it's actually ball shaped. Is that a problem? They want both. Derek simply grinned. I thought so. He tossed George the football first. George caught it out of the air with one hand and began to bounce it up and down in his fingers, feeling the weight of it. Derek popped the soccer ball gently over to Nicholas, who watched his brother intently. Nicholas had to catch it with both hands. He wrapped his arms around the ball and hugged it in his chest. Give me a moment, I gotta blow my nose. Sorry about that. And with his brothers taken care of, Derek crouched again to reveal a third ball. He brought a second football. Derek had been prepared. He then sprung back to his feet. Another problem diverted. George, Nicholas, you can use this half of the field. I'll use that half. Chippy can be your ref. So don't get too far from him, alright? Okay. George tossed his football in the air, preoccupied, and spun it in an arc downward.
All right.
I'm gonna practice. Nicholas embraced his soccer ball tighter, pressing his cheek into it. You wondered just how he'd practice with it when the equipment was about as big as his head. The child looked completely content with the word, but Derek's eyes narrowed. Once again, he shared some Nicholas info to your ear. Watch him. It's not over. He copies what I say, but it's not what he means. You snuck a peek at Nicholas. He appeared so innocent, clutching his ball and staring at a patch of clover in the grass. But you'd interacted with him enough not to question his potential for trouble. You'd make sure to keep an eye on the kid. I will.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chippy. You're a lifesaver. Derek held his football in both hands and cheered. Bye, bros. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, bro. Derek put on a smile as he picked up his bag, tucked his football under an arm, and jogged to his feet. Sight of the field, he didn't have time to lose. You stood with the younger Sarah's boys effectively turned loose. George stared at you with uncertainty, while Nicholas's mischievously smirk could only make you guess what he was thinking. You weren't going to make Mr. Sarah's regret letting you come, and you especially weren't going to disappoint Derek. You were going to watch those boys. Time to be in charge. I'm going to play over there. He pointed vigorously at the opposite side of the field from Derek and trotted off to entertain himself. You let him go without argument. George wasn't the problem child. When you saw him settle in, throwing around his football and chasing it, you smiled. You would only need to manage Nicholas. You aimed your grin towards him, but instead of being in the clover patch, he was missing. You snapped your head back and forth until you spotted him in a fumbling dash across the grass, struggling to keep his soccer ball from slipping out of his small arms. When Derek said, "Watch him," he had really meant it. Your first babysitting gig started off with a bang. You ran over and picked him up. He's small. You pick him up. Shouldn't be that heavy. Even with your longer legs, it was still tricky to catch the kid. He shrieked and laughed when you plucked him off the grass. The soccer ball tumbled from his arms. He reached for it with all his might, stretching his arms and kicking his legs for momentum. You couldn't contain him, so you carefully placed him back on his feet before he could fall. I'm going to go with the first one. Then you kicked the ball back to him and suggested playing. Let's play. I'm gonna get it. He squealed at the idea. He chased the ball, determined to beat you to it, and wound up to kick. He overshot the angle of his feet, and the ball bounced off awkwardly. Then you were the one after the soccer ball. It didn't go that far. You let Nicholas get it again so he could continue to gradually kick the ball across the field. He sent some strands of grass into the air along with the ball on the second goal. Darn, I'm gonna get you. Nicholas crackled while bumping the ball along. No, I'm gonna win. When you next got close to the soccer ball, you switched strategies. Nicholas grabbed it in his hands so he could simply run for it. That's not how soccer works. It's mine. You laughed off his blatant rule breaking and started running around after Nicholas jerkily. The only times your gaze stayed from the little Suras was when you blinked or sent an occasional glance George's way. George continued to enjoy his time at the park without any need for assistance, so you spent most of your energy on the mischief maker. And after smoothing out the initial bump of the afternoon, things evened out. At least things were fine until the trail known as lunch arrived. It started with a reappearance of Derek. His presence sent Nicholas into hyperdrive. He bounced on his tip of his toes and waved both of his hands frantically. Derek's back. He tackled his older brother and latched around Derek's leg. George, like half of the entire park, knows the shout. He jogged over to see if any important updates were happening without him. Derek winked. Hey, bros.
What's up?
Hi, Chippy. I hope you're doing alright. As he spoke, he lifted his bag, dropped to the ground, crouched over it, and scrounged up and packed the lunches. I'm gonna go with the third one. I don't know how you do this all the time. Running after Nicholas had been crazy. How did the kid have that much energy? Derek amazed you for being able to manage his little brother on the regular. Well, I try my best. Derek set aside 3 paper bags in the grass, one in front of Nicholas, and another next to George, and the third one went to you. Derek kept the 4th lunch bag inside of his backpack. He only pulled a water bottle out from it and closed the bag back up. Okay, Nicholas, you've got to eat now with Chippy and George. Nicholas clenched Derek's jeans more desperately as he whined. You're not gonna eat with me? Derek scratched the back of his head and gave a longing glance back to where he'd been practicing. Do you mind, Chippy? I was hoping I'd have more time to practice. He shrugged apologetically, knowing that he was asking a lot. Sure, good luck with your practice. Thanks, I owe you one. Nicholas, whimpering, never stopped being high-pitched background noise. Derek ruffled his hair. Hey, check this out. He picked up Nicholas's soccer ball and placed it on the top of his own head. Nicholas' jaw dropped theatrically as Derek fully stood up while keeping it balanced.
Wow!
Nicholas cheered and jumping up and down, still holding onto Derek's leg. Derek bent his knees and then popped up fast enough to launch the ball in the air. He caught it on his head again. Nicholas let go of his brother and to clap. Derek grinned at Nicholas, but his gaze flicked to you for a second. The show over, Derek inclined his head to let the soccer ball drop to his hands. He held it out to Nicholas. Make sure to eat good lunch, okay? Oh, make sure to eat a good lunch, okay? Then you can get back to practicing. Okay. Nicholas spoke into the soccer ball he had cuddled to his face. He'd been starstruck enough that he couldn't disagree with anything his biggest brother said. Derek waved at you and George before heading off to where he'd left his football, carrying only the water ball with him. George promptly took a seat in the grass by the lunch bags. Nicholas put the soccer ball on his head. It immediately rolled off. He just tried again. You reached over to the lunches. Each bag had clearly written name, black marker ink. George collected his bag. You had yours, and you attempted to give the last one to its proper owner. But Nicholas showed zero interest in the bag. You imagined he would have more interested. He was more interested in Derek's lunch bag, even though they probably had the same meals. Excuse me. George scuffled, knowing his brother was going to be difficult again. He took a sandwich from his bag. From the looks alone, you guessed it was sliced deli turkey, a pale colored cheese, and some veggies. With Nicholas clearly busy, you took his sandwich out for him. The sandwich was ham and some sort of orangey cheese, cheddar almost certainly. You offered the food directly to Nicholas, and he still didn't bite. He wanted to play. Okay, let's do this one. If you eat, I'll hold the ball over your head for you. Deal? Nicholas chewed on the inside of his cheek while he carefully contemplated your suggestion. Then focus look melted into a bright smile.
All right.
He gave you a determined nod. When he was ready to switch, your fingers fangled out as you reached for the ball and pressed it down into his messy mop of hair. Nicholas cautiously released the ball and you kept it firmly in place. He giggled aesthetically, I think that's the word, that he finally found a way to keep the ball up without using his hands. It just took another person to do it. He retrieved his sandwich and immediately stuffed a big bite into his cheeks. Chuckling, you took a glance over at what George was doing. Luckily, he didn't need a hand like his brother. He was already enjoying his packed lunch, so you decided not to squander the opportunity. You retrieved your own sandwich with your free hand and dug in. It was definitely an interesting way to enjoy a meal break. Finishing the last corner of your square-shaped meal, you wondered if Miss Sarah's had talked to one of your moms beforehand about lunch. The sandwich was made how you had it at home. She was either prepared or very lucky. But considering what her oldest son was like, you were guessing luck had nothing to do with it. Okay, I didn't skip anything. Along with the sandwiches, there was also bags of carrots, celery, and a few cookies. Between the three of you, it wasn't long before all the snacks were gone. With nothing left to nibble on, Nicholas yawned and curled up in the grass and cuddled the soccer ball against his chest. George stood up, watching his little brother fall asleep. Once he was certain that Nicholas was down for the count, he started cleaning up the trash. You admired the maturity he showed for his age. It wasn't just Derek who had that streak after all. You helped gather the trash while musing about the Suarez brothers. Derek was the oldest and who his parents relied on, while Nicholas was the baby of the family. And for a little kid, he was a force to be reckoned with. George was the one stuck in the middle. Seriously, thank you for helping me with this. George almost dropped to the plastic baggies and used napkins he was collecting between his fingers, but he managed to regain hold of everything before it fell. He didn't know how to respond to your gratitude. The longer he stood there staring at you, the more his blush darkened.
Okay.
Embarrassed, he quickly pivoted back to what he was doing before. You left the subject there, but thought he deserved more praise. The park suddenly felt empty with Nicholas asleep. He took up a lot of space despite his tiny size. Chuckling to yourself, you found a comfortable spot in the grass and scanned the area for Derek. You eventually caught sight of him running in the distance. Even from here, you could tell Derek was persistent about his practice. He went back and forth, repeating the same set of moves, recessing and refining his form every time. Though it wasn't long before he paused to wipe his brow with his back wrist hand. Derek happened to glance your way at that moment and realized that he had an audience of one. He gave a huge wave with both hands that registered. He crossed both his arms over his head, and before you knew it, Derek's strides were bringing him back over to you with his brothers.
Phew.
That's it. I'm gonna be done with practice. I'm back. Welcome back. Thanks for watching, George and Nicholas. I don't mean it to be so long. I didn't mean it for it to be so long. I'm gonna go with a 30. It's okay. I'm happy I could help you out. The sincerity in your voice had Derek bashfully keeping his eyes on his shoes instead. Your heart rate picked up as he chose to respond in kind. I'll probably end up saying it again, but thanks, Chippy. You're a lifesaver. Next, he shifted his attention over to his brothers. George gave a little wave. He'd been waiting patiently for his big brother to wrap up his conversation with you. We're going back. George simply got up, not needing any more guidance, while Derek kneeled in the grass to nudge Nicholas out of dreamland. A single eye cracked open at first, and then they both popped wide open when he realized who was with him.
Derek!
Nicholas sprung up off the ground, wrapping his arms around his big brother like a vice grip, and nuzzled into his chest. Derek gave Nicholas's head a single pat.
Let's go.
Practice was good today. Let's go home.
Let's go home.
Nicholas's hushed voice echoing his brother's put a warm smile on your face. Surveying the area, you made sure that nothing would be accidentally left behind. Then you breathed a sigh of relief. You made it through your first time solo babysitting. Although Derek was technically still nearby the whole time, so it wasn't completely solo, but you weren't bothered by that. Derek trusted you with his siblings, and they were both still in one piece. With your leadership, no one got lost, injured, shallowed, or swallowed something they shouldn't have, or even declared that they hated you for eternity. So in your book, you'd say it went fairly well. The 15-minute walk back from the park passed by pleasantly. The late afternoon sun fell behind you, and your shadow soon stretched across the sidewalk. You wiggled your fingers and then excreted your hands movement in order to watch the shadow change. Meanwhile, next to you, Derek was finally eating his lunch. Although he had to eat his sandwich with a hand, and Nicholas wasn't clasping tightly onto it. George entered, entertaining himself with football he still carried. He periodically tossed it up in the air and caught it again. You could easily imagine how often the three of them had made this trip before, with only the three of them, but you didn't feel out of place strolling alongside the group. It felt natural. Beaming, you found your gaze setting on on Derek again. You knew without a doubt that the way you felt was because of him. He was so good at making you feel welcome. In time, you made it safely back, and Derek popped his bag on the floor with a quiet sigh of relief. Any hope he had take things easy for a second immediately evaporated.
We're going to the pool as soon as we come back.
I know, you promised him, right? Nicholas's joy was palpable, parroting back Derek's promise from earlier in the day. As the words drowned on him, Derek closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Yep, we are. Get ready. And that was all the approval Nicholas and George needed. They both dashed off to their shared bedroom to get changed. Derek struggling opened his eyes, but his tiredness softened when he looked at you.
It's okay.
Practice is done. If you want to stay up here until your moms can come get you, that's cool. Derek gave a partial shrug, then ran a hand through his hair shyly. We don't have to go swimming again. but I want to hang out with you. The tips of his ears burned red at your declaration, but he didn't turn away from you. He spoke cheerfully instead. Thanks. Me too, Chippy. It wasn't much longer before the younger kids came running out to rejoin you and Derek. They both wore their non-neon colored swimsuits and had towels wrapped around their shoulders.
Awesome.
Nice job. You even remembered your floaty vest, Nicholas. Derek kneeled down to make sure the safety device was properly secured. Nicholas stood tall with his chest out proudly. He didn't fear the sarcasm. I did the straps for him. Perfect, thanks. George brightened just as his younger brother had. Standing back up, Derek shifted his attention to you, saying, "Quick change strategy from earlier." Yeah. You darted off to get changed first. Derek nodded seriously when you returned to take over for him. He reemerged a couple minutes later and distinctly went over to the counter to write something down. Curious, you inched closer. Just gotta leave a note so Dad knows where we are. Then we can go. Oh, sounds good. Everything was squared away as Derek was always sure to do. The four of you marched right back out of the apartment for another excursion. By the time the distant smell of chlorine tickled your nose, the sun had fallen low in the sky. You circled around some nearby lounge chairs and deemed them capable of keeping things safe. Inspecting the gleaming water, you noticed that George and Nicholas hadn't moved towards the pool yet. Both of the little boys were watching Derek like hawks. You picked up enough of this afternoon to know excuse me, to know it was because George didn't want to do anything without permission, and Nicholas didn't want to do anything Derek wasn't doing. Sorry about that.
I'm on it.
Here I go. And Derek himself knew it too. He didn't keep them waiting. Derek offered his brothers an encouraging wave to strut over to the pool. You followed him into the water. Wait for me. Derek paused at the pool's edge and glanced over his shoulder. He beamed at you. All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. You summarily leaped into the pool, making a huge splash. After a dark few seconds, you made your way to the surface to take a breath. Derek, meanwhile, stayed under. The other Sora's sons followed George, jumped in without any hesitation, but Nicholas sped right to the edge, only to come to an abrupt stop. His toes curled around the edge of the pool, and his lips were pressed into a tight frown. Nicholas tipped his head and stared down at the water, clenching his hands together. He was scared to jump. Nicholas would rather the pool come to the rest of the way to him, but it wasn't being a good sport. Derek and George popped out of the water with matching wide grins and droplets clinging into the tips of their hair. Neither were surprised that they were missing their baby brother. All right. Wahoo. That was awesome. Nicholas's cry for help came out in a tiny, impatient squeak. He began wiggling in place. Derek chuckled and swam over to the shallow spot. The 6-year-old followed closely, toddling along the edge. When his feet touched the pool's solid bottom, Derek stood up. He cunningly held his arms out towards his brother.
This is gonna be great.
Come on in, Nico. The water's fine. Trusting him completely, Nicholas let go of his fear. He took a step over the side and walked into the favorite person's hold. Derek embraced Nicholas as he dropped against his chest. Then Derek slowly lowered him closer to the water before he completely let his little brother go. Nicholas bobbed under with a small splash and broke out again in an instant like a buoy. He was bursting at the seams with excellent excitement. Excuse me.
Woo!
Nicholas made the most of his new floating freedom by dog paddling around the shallow end. Checking on George, you noticed that he was sticking to the center of the pool. He bounced himself from the floor to the surface for air, then pushed back to do it all over again. He leapt all around in a circle. Derek rested an arm across the pool's edge and took a moment to watch his brothers too. You swam over to Derek and settled against the wall with him. You closed your eyes and sighed. The water's temperature was pleasantly warm against the cooling evening air. Sorry about that. Derek kept his main focus on his family, though he spared a moment to tilt his head in your direction. A few beads of water trailed from his hairline down the side of his jaw. Babysitting isn't that bad, huh? No, I was worried over nothing.
Honestly,
My brothers are fun, some of the time. He chuckled at his own joke and ran a damp hand down his face to try getting at least some of the water off. The final rays of sunlight cast warm glow on his skin, and the pool sparkled as he finally turned his attention directly towards you. You felt toastier all of a sudden, like someone had pulled the sun back up to the center of the sky. Derek's mouth turned into his usual wonderful smile. I don't know what I'd do without them. You sound like a proud dad. He smirked at your teasing, but he quickly lost his force as his cheeks grew pink. Derek hid his face in his hands. I don't even want to think about being a real parent right now. Being the oldest kid is enough for me. Shaking his head, he kept his brothers in his sight. The affection returned to his expression. I'm proud of them, though. George and Nicholas remained engrossed in their own watery adventures, while you and Derek kept track of them. You were in mid-conversation when the sound of footsteps echoed off the walls surrounding the pool. Derek shot an arm out of the water and waved at the newcomer. Dad.
Good evening.
Oh, it's Mr. Soares. Dad. All the Soares boys eagerly paddled over to the end of the pool where their father stood. They moved together in the water with their heads beside each other and their legs kicked out behind them like a pile of seal pups.
welcome home.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Mr. Soares' voice was sweet as he observed his children's happy faces. Eventually he spotted you as well, and he tucked his fingers into the edge of his vest with vigor. Oh, this is a pool party today. You know, a party should have the proper food. Let's order pizza for dinner tonight. Yeah. Laughing with excitement, Nicholas started smirking the palms of his hands against the water surface, making several bursting splashes. George flicked droplets from the tips of his fingers at Nicholas in retaliation. Chuckling over the scene, Mr. Suarez brought a hand up and held into his chin. He scratched at his beard with his thumb. Half cheese, half pepperoni for the first, correct? Yes. Pepperoni. Nicholas threw both of his arms in the air as he cheered. Mrs. Suarez nodded. Pleased, his littlest ones still had predictable tastes.
Wonderful.
Okay. And meat and veggie supreme for Irene and I on the second. He settled his gaze on Derek and you for the final decision. Suggestions for what the final half should be. Chippy, you pick. You floated over to closer to Derek as you thought about it. How about Hawaiian? That's my favorite. You know, basically it's just not pepperoni. It's ham and pineapple. Derek gave you a big thumbs up for that.
So,
In full, half cheese and half pepperoni, half supreme and half Hawaiian.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you, children. I'll put the order in now. I'll come back and let you know when it's ready, but until then, continue to play. Thanks, Dad. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dad. Bye, Mr. Suarez. Mr. Suarez closed the pool gate behind him, leaving the kids to your fun. Leaving you kids to your fun. In Mr. Suarez's absence, Derek took charge again. Alright, you heard it, Dad's ordering pizza, so it'll be here in likely 30 minutes. So think fast. What's the last thing you want to do before we have to leave the pool? Nicholas frowned his brow, thinking as hard as he could. He scrunched his face together in frustration when nothing came to mind. Meanwhile, George put a hand on his chin and tilted his head to the side. He stared up and off into space as he considered the question. You left it open for the younger kids to decide. Narrowing your gaze, you wondered who would speak up first. You crossed your arms and sat tight. The boys would have to come up with their own answers. We could make a whirlpool.
Yeah.
Nicholas' pearls grew huge with anticipation. Yeah. Nicholas giggled as Derek hooked his fingers all the vest straps around the vest straps. Derek started moving forward, dragging his little brother along for the ride. George pumped his arms and excitedly jogged against the resistance of the water. You darted into their little conga line to get the water going even faster. Around and around all went from corner to corner of the shallow inn. It wasn't long before there was enough motion to start a current. Nicholas was still loudly squealing when Derek let him go so he could float along in the moving water. Like a man on a mission, George hopped out of the pool and barreled into the nearby pool shed. He reamed with the pool noodle, vigorously held it in his fist. George jumped back into the pool with it between his legs. He he surfaced and drifted along, riding the pool noodle like a cowboy riding a horse off into the sunset. You and Derek continued to push the water by running circles and stop the whirlpool dying out. Each time Derek lapped one of his brothers on the loop, he gave them a high five. The four of you thoroughly enjoyed your time at the pool. It flew by so fast that you were surprised when you spotted Mr. Suarez cruising down to the water's edge once more. Dinner's here, and even better, Mom's home. Yay! The youngest Suarez threw his wet confetti into the air. Even his dad wasn't safe from it. Mr. Suarez took in stride and whipped his glasses against his vest. Derek was out of breath, but he beamed. Let's go get some food. Yeah. Mr. Suarez led the way to the apartment, and the four of you kids marched with an eager spring in your steps. Despite being wrapped in towels, you dripped water the whole way there. The savory smell of hot cheese and garlic crust was there to greet you when you arrived at the door. You could hear the musical words of Miss Suarez, too.
Welcome.
Welcome home. Hi. Hi, Mom.
Hi.
Hi, Mom. Feeling a bit awkward, out of place, you gave a tiny wave to Miss Suarez. Didn't miss it, and her voice softened as she spoke to you first. Hello, Chippy. I hope you had fun today. I did. We had lots of fun.
That's great.
Very good. Miss Suarez then went over to the kitchen where the food was set on the counter. She popped the boxes open and delightedly glanced over at her husband. This was such a good idea. Thank you. Mr. Suarez dipped his head in a tiny bow. He followed that by gesturing a hand towards the food.
Well then,
Come, get dinner. Youngest to the oldest. Order. Despite the order given, it was no surprise that George was the one who moved first. You figured Nicholas would wait for Derek, even if he didn't have to. George tore off a paper towel from the roll and used it to grab a slice of plain cheese pizza. He hot-footed it back over to the entryway, standing there so he wouldn't bring water any further into the apartment. You can go next, Chippy. It'll be easier that way. The food smelled even better up close. You grabbed a slice of Hawaiian. You hurled back to the entryway with your dinner. Derek went next, tiptoeing over with Nicholas at his heels. He grabbed a slice of pepperoni and passed it to Nicholas. Derek then grabbed a slice of pepperoni for himself, but instead of going to the entryway, he went to an open space on the floor. You curiously watched as Derek laid his towel on the floor, then sat down on it, crossing his legs. Nicholas popped down on the towel next to him and started on one of his pizza crust corners. You decided to sit down on your towel instead. Oh, that's a good idea. You followed Derek's example and laid your own towel out on the floor with cheeks stuffed with pizza. Derek gave you a cheeriest closed mouth smile he could. Finally, Mr. and Ms. Soros got to their slices of pizza. They stood in the living room in between the spots their sons had taken.
So?
How did you spend your day while we were out? We did lots of things. In between taking big bites of pizzas, the Soros family started talking, taking turns telling stories about their day. Nicholas recounted the events of the day with most enthusiasm. Though they were the same plot points from his brother's stories and the ones you witnessed firsthand from his perspective, the events were almost mythically amazing. Storytelling was hungry work, so the slices didn't last long at all. The food was chipped away piece by piece until everyone was stuffed. Nicholas laid down on the floor, limbs stretched out and still wrapped in his towel. He was completely tuckered from the day. Mr. Soros plucked him off the floor and held him under one arm. Bath time. Come on, Junior.
Yes, Dad.
Nicholas accepted his fate, and his arms hugged lumpily down. George coupled up his paper towel into a ball and tossed it into the trash. He followed his dad.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gregorio. Miss Suarez watched them go with gentle affection in her gaze. She patted her husband's shoulder as he passed by and then strolled over to you and Derek. And thank you for a good day's work. I appreciate you both for taking care of Nicholas and George today. Her cheeriness reminded you so much of Derek's. She pointed with her thumb over her shoulder. Dad and I will take them from here. Thanks, Mom. You could see there the wave of relief wash over him as clearly as the actual water had just swam in. I'll keep an ear out for the phone. Pamela said she'd call when they're on the way here to get Chippy. Okay. I gotta turn the air off. It's getting too cold. After that, Miss Suarez excused herself to go to help get George and Nicholas ready for bedtime. When she disappeared down the hall, Derek leaned back on the palms of his hands. He lazily rolled his head in your direction.
Hey.
We can get dressed again, then would you want to hang out in my room until your mom gets here? Yeah, let's do that. You can get changed first. He stretched his legs out on the floor while you stood up. You could feel a slight ache in your muscles from today's activities. It wasn't bad. You'd given your all during your babysitting adventure. Gathering your things up in your arms, you lift to get changed. It wasn't long before you and Derek went over to his room for some sibling-less free time. This is Derek's room. Okay. Derek opened his bedroom door and gestured for you to lead the way. You went in while he followed close behind, shutting the door once more. Your eyes widened as you scanned the small space. Usually you were outside when you hung out with Derek, so this was the first time you'd been inside his room. Within reach of his neatly made bed was a bookshelf filled with novels, various scattered soccer balls and footballs stuck out around the books and furniture. Things were arranged and organized with the same care Derek put into most things he did. If there was more time, you were sure there were tons more trinkets and treasures to spot here, like a game of I Spy. It wasn't big, But Derek made the most of his small pieces of the world. This is amazing. Yeah. Lightly pushing the soccer ball aside with the side of your foot, you sprung over to the side of the room. You wanted to read the spines of the various books on the shelves. Amazing, huh? It's just my room.
Whoa.
Wait, we've never hung out in my room, have we? Nope. This is all new for me. That's kind of weird to think about.
Sorry.
But anyway, sorry, I don't have any chairs in here. You can sit on my bed if you want. Thanks, I appreciate that. You sat on the edge of his mattress. After the busy day you had, it was without a doubt nice to relax on something soft. Derek's expression brightened since you took him up on his offer. Derek crossed over to the foot of his bed and sat on the end of it, his jaws stretched open in a huge yawn that he quietly covered with his hand.
Good job, team.
Phew, we're finally done. There was no missing the proud satisfaction of burning in his green eyes, but you could also consequently see the places where he was wilting. Sometimes you kind of worried about how he threw himself wholeheartedly into things all the time. Let's see. I hope I was at least helpful today.
Definitely.
His whole demeanor lit up as he pressed the palm of his hand into the mattress and leaned slightly in your direction. An embarrassed blush rose on your cheeks. Seriously, Chippy, you were super helpful. Today was the easiest babysitting has ever been, and the most fun. I had no idea. I'm even more glad that I was here.
Same.
Me too. Derek stretched his arms high in the air and yawned again. His eyelids dropped as he turned towards you. Gradually, carefully, warmth faded from his demeanor. His face fell into a quiet frown when his hands had returned to his lap.
You don't have to.
You don't have to do it again, Chippy. Whether it's a good time or a bad time, it's just a lot of time, and you have your own things to deal with. Your brows bent at that, tilting your head. You couldn't help but think about how much of Derek's days went into his brothers. It definitely didn't seem to match how things were with your sister and you. But then, as if summoned by your thoughts about him, in the bedroom door cracked open just enough to let a giggling Nicholas slip in. He threw his hands in the air. I'm dressed. With a loud thud, the door swung fully open and George marched in with an extremely annoyed scowl. He put his hands on his hips. Nicholas, we're playing in the living room, not Derek's room. George reached for his younger brother, but Nicholas scurried up onto the bed. Weirdly peeked at George from behind Derek's shoulder. Derek notably didn't say a single word, nor did he appear surrounded without intrusion at all. The only movement he made was a light pat on the mess of hair on Nicholas's head, like usual. What wasn't usual was the different look on his face. He'd accepted reality at hand, but did not welcome it. Mr. and Mrs. Soros crowded into the room next.
Excuse us.
Sorry, Derek. He slipped away in a flash.
Yeah. No more.
Come on, Nicholas. Let Derek and Chippy have some peace. The youngest Soros stubbornly clung onto Derek's arm. His cheeks puffed out angrily. Nicholas, go hang out with Mom and Dad. Don't you want to see them too? They missed you today. Don't you want to see Mom and Dad too? Come on, Derek. Nicholas loosened his grip as he shifted to get a better look at his big brother. Derek sighed spiritedly. I do, but I have a friend over right now. I'll spend time with Mom and Dad and you later. Nicholas bent forward and grasped Nicholas' pant leg. He brought out the big guns and started up at him with his most pitiful eyes and matching pout. Well, I'm not surprised this happened. The words fell from you in a low voice as your shoulders slumped after witnessing the brothers firsthand. You should have known better than to expect some uninterrupted one-on-one time with Derek. An embarrassed blush spread across your skin over how foolish you felt. Nicholas did as you expected and refused to budge from his spot, holding onto Derek even tighter.
End of discussion.
Nicholas, we're reading a story right now. Nicholas angrily shook his head as she advanced across the room. She unapologetically peeled her smallest child off Derek. The young boy let out a high-pitched whine for the entire extraction. George frowned sympathetically over the confrontation, while Derek winced at the noise. When the deed was done, the middle son followed his mom out of the room. You could still hear Nicholas' piercing cry as he was carried away. I'm very sorry about the interruption. Continue as you were. None of us were ever here. He gave the both of you an encouraging smile before carefully shutting the door. It was finally silent. Derek kept an eye out until he finally believed that there wouldn't immediately be another sibling disaster. When he deemed it safe, he let out a quick sigh in an attempt to choke back a harsher groan. Derek flopped back against the mattress with another huff and stretched his arms out of his side. His arms twitched and his fingers curled into the fist.
Ah!
There's never any privacy here. How am I still having to deal with things even after spending almost the whole day with him? You held your tongue, waiting patiently for him to get it all out. Derek muttered grievousness under his breath with a harsh glare aimed at the ceiling for a good minute and screwed his mouth shut. Yeah, I think this one is a good answer. And I thought Elizabeth could be difficult to deal with. It was like your commitment sliced through his festering thoughts. His face twitched like he was fighting to hold on to his frustration, but a snorted and weak laughter went out. Maybe you should ask her for some advice on getting people to leave you alone. You want to ask my sister for advice? Please, I don't think so. He started absently-mindedly tugging at the tips of his hair. He gave his joke some serious thought. You crossed your arms trying to figure out what your sister would do in Eric's shoes. Maybe I'm not sure what she'd say, but I like the way you do things. Thanks, Chippy. Evening, evening in his breath, Derek folded his arms across his chest and squeezed his eyelids shut. You could tell by the tension in his face that he was still bothered. He was thinking hard, searching for something.
Man.
I can make this work. His low mumble was followed by a pause that had you intrigued. Then he jumped forward so that he was sitting upright again. The grin you were so used to seeing was back in full force. Chippy, when I go back to the pool, nobody's gonna be there this late, and my bros are not gonna be able to leave the house. We don't have to get in or even change clothes. I think it'd be kind of nice place to talk and that sort of thing. Avoiding your gaze, Derek nervously rubbed the back of his head. You could tell that he was trying his hardest to be nonchalant, but he wasn't exactly succeeding. Good thinking. All right. Derek leapt up to his feet and turned, holding his hand out for you to take. Chuckling, you gripped his hand tightly. Derek squeezed you back and helped pull you up to your feet. Let's go. The door slowly creaked open as Derek peeked out, double checking that the coast actually was clear. He gave you a thumbs up. I don't see Nicholas. I think we're good. You returned his thumbs up slightly, hoping that this wasn't the calm before the storm. Derek led you into the living room where you found his dad and George sitting together on the couch. Hello, Mom has Nicholas in his room. Interrupted in another exciting session of story time. Good. Chippy and I were gonna go down to the pool area to hang out. Is that okay?
Of course.
He chuckled, knowing exactly what Derek was trying to accomplish. George was perfectly happy where he was with his dad, so he waved goodbye to you both. Don't keep Chippy out too late. I won't, thanks, Dad. Derek whispered with a complete confidence. You gave your appreciation in equally hushed tone. Thank you, Mr. Suarez. The last thing either of you wanted was to alert the youngest Suarez that anything fun was happening without his knowledge. So you both silently slipped out of the apartment. Once you were free from the condo's walls, Derek's excitement was palpable. You picked up the pace and raced to the pool gate. For the third time in a single day, you and Derek stepped out step foot on the condo complex's private pool deck. But you soon realized you hadn't seen everything it had to offer yet. Under the cover of the night, the pool was completely aglow with lights set into the bottom. The bright blue struck you as inviting breaths of steam drifted off the top of the water, whispering how warm it was. The closed-in space was clear of any other people, and it had been like that for a while, considering the stillness of the pool. Not a single ripple disrupted its aquamarine surface. Here you'd have peace and privacy. Derek was drawn into the water like a moth to a flame. He wordlessly rolled up his jeans and tugged off his sneakers and socks, then dunked his feet right into the pool up into the middle of his calf. He stretched and wiggled his bare toes in the comfortable embrace of the heated pool on a summer night. You joined Derek at the edge. You dipped your feet in as well. You removed your own shoes and let your feet soak in the pool. It was pleasant. It was as pleasant as its sparkling appearance promised. The water had none of the sight chill that the air did. It was perfect. It was the perfect amount of heat. Derek wrapped both of his hands around the smooth edge of the tilted back. One of his legs kicked up, his back drifted down like his upper and lower body were each one side of a seesaw. He grinned playfully at you.
But
So, what were we talking about? Oh, I don't remember.
oh,
Oh well, it's not your fault. He solemnly brought his torso back up until he was hunched over the water. He stared down at it. All his lightheartedness had disappeared in an instant. That kind of makes the whole interruption thing even more sucky, though. There wasn't any heart in it, but Derek managed a chuckle. Sorry for making my problems your problems. He dug his fingers into the side of his hair, stretching at it in frustration.
it doesn't matter.
I don't even know what my problem is. They came in the room for 5 seconds. I'm so dramatic. Derek, that's not dramatic. It wasn't the only thing that happened today. Maybe if I save it, I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna save it. I can always go back and change the answer. Yeah, I'm gonna start with this one. See if that. Yeah. Derek crossed his arms tight and pushed them against the top of his legs. The blue water rippled around him as his legs moved against the pool wall. He pressed his heels into it. The pressure that had been only on the inside was coming out. It's just the thing is, Nicholas and George need me all the time, and my parents need me because they need me. I don't want to let them down. I really don't, but it's hard. Every day is like I'm going to mess up and disappoint somebody. He bit his tongue and released his limbs from the locked positions they'd been stuck on. He couldn't scrub the furrow away from his brows.
Forget it.
Everyone has stuff to worry about. It's not just me. Mom has to take care of them way more than I do. And Dad works a job pretty much the entire day. Let's see what choose. Yeah, I admire you.
I don't know.
I don't know why. He went silent, unmoved. Nicholas was the one who caused trouble, but somehow Derek had made himself the bad guy. It was upsetting, but Derek wasn't anywhere close to really being grown up. Of course, he couldn't be perfect, even though he acted like he thought he should be. Derek, remember when your dad first came to the pool? You and George and Nicholas were all excited. You were just like your brothers. Even if you're in charge sometimes, you're still your parents' kid. You don't have to act like an adult. Especially not with me. Damn. Finally, slowly, carefully, Derek dared to glance at you again. Thanks, Chippy, for saying all that. His shoulders swished inward to frame his lowered head. He looked so much like a hopeful puppy that he could give even Nicholas a run for his money. in an adorable face department.
Was it annoying?
It really doesn't bother you that I complain and sometimes hang out with me means helping out with the two other kids. For all the confidence Derek displayed, when push came to shove, he was pretty insecure about himself and what you thought of him. Derek, I love hanging out with you no matter what. Derek showed his full face to you. It was all lit up by the light shining through the water. The smile on his face was just glittering.
Well,
I don't even want to be a pain, but it's really cool. I have a friend who doesn't mind listening to me and being there. Of course. He didn't say that lightly. He only wanted to let himself be there for you and everyone else. Being somebody Derek could count on was special. His cheeks flushed just admitting it, but with the way your heart fluttered, you were sure your face was a match. Then his eyebrows furrowed mischievously, and just like that, he catapulted right off the edge into the pool. You gasped as you were the one who suddenly got plunged underwater. Derek burst through the surface with a loud, gasping laugh. The water is great. You broke it out in laughter.
this is gonna be great.
Everything's gonna be good, Chippy. I'm not an adult. That was true. You pushed yourself right off the side of the pool after him. In an instant, you were hit with an explosion of bubbles as you sunk down into the water. You waited until you felt the pool floor, then kicked it off and popped your head out of the water. Wahoo! Whoa! Derek pumped both of his fists in the air. His black wrist bands dropped further down his arms, heavy from being soaked. The two of you paddled through the water together. Added weight of your clothes had both winded pretty quick. That only amused Derek more. Laughter and sloughing weather brought the once stagnant pool to life. You and Derek still had the place to yourself, made an absolute most of it. But eventually Derek crawled up the stairs out of the pool. His baggy clothes poured out many waterfalls with every step he took on land. Derek looked especially tiny with his drenched jersey draped over his frame. He waited there at the top of the steps for you to catch up. Being dripping gentleman he was. You held the rail with each step the stairs, and you felt the weight of your soaked clothes pressing down on you more. You got a thumbs up from Derek when you made it out. Sorry about that. Then he carefully tipped off his head to the side and tapped his hands against his ears to get the water out.
Well?
Alright, time to face the music. Having to go home damped Derek's mood far more than the water on his body. He could do anything here in the wide open pool with you as only a companion. Going back to his family came with countless exceptions and responsibilities, but it still had to be done. Yeah. You gave a small nod, readying yourself for whatever might happen when you arrived at Sora's condo. Without another word, you collected your shoes and left the little oasis behind. You held each other's hands. Ah, he's blushing. His slippery fingers gripped you as tightly as they could. When you made it to the front door, Derek used a key from his pocket to open it. He hadn't forgotten to bring it, despite leaving under rushed and uneasy circumstances. Derek stood in there in front of the unlocked door, just staring at it. Practical preparation was his forte. Making himself ready for bumps in relationships was not. I've got your back, Derek. We can do it. Yeah. He took in a huge breath through his nose and turned the knob. The living room was quiet when you went inside. George and Mr. Suarez had moved in over to the kitchen and were busy putting together a puzzle. Mr. Suarez's shoulder blocked your view, so you couldn't see what the picture was supposed to be. Miss Suarez and Nicholas were nowhere in sight. You guess they were still in the younger boy's bedroom. It was strange not to have someone cheer and shout when Derek walked through the door. There was a feeling of absence. "We're back," he announced himself with absolute lack of enthusiasm. He might as well have been calling off bingo numbers to an empty room. Mr. Suarez lifted his head and turned to face the both of you. At the same time, he eagerly pushed his chair away from the counter.
I see.
"Thank you for coming home." The greeting he gave was so normal that it was weird, considering how you and Derek each brought a bucket full of water absorbed into your clothes. George offered a typical family greeting of his own, not taking his eyes off the puzzle. He was either focused on avoiding the awkwardness. He was eagerly focused or avoiding the awkwardness.
Welcome back.
Derek certainly poked a bare big toe into the prickly entryway doormat. The mess Derek's foot was making was too much for the little mat to contain. Water leaked out from the edges. Derek's attempt to face his family was going equally smoothly. The bright pleasantries on Mr. Suarez's face softened into a warmth. He followed through on the motion he started and got out of his chair. He crossed the living room and to stand with the two of you at the front door. "My hard-working son is always in demand. Our family needs to learn how to share, especially Nicholas." The last part was said with a little chuckle. Derek didn't smile from the compliment, but he did start to blush.
Excuse me.
"Excuse us." A new voice came from the hall. Miss Suarez stood there with her hands on her hips, peeking up from behind the skirt of her dress was a distant, spiky nest of brown hair. "Now that you're here, someone has something he wants to say to his big brother." Her words got George to actually turn away from the puzzle and watch the scene, but Nicholas remained hidden. Her encouragement wasn't enough. As always, he was waiting for Derek. You didn't need to tell Derek that, though. He knew it far better than you. He shifted his weight on his feet and gave Nicholas an invitation.
Okay.
"Okay then, what did you want to say?" Nicholas darted out from behind his mom with enough speed to flutter her dress. His tiny feet thundered under the floor until he came to an abrupt stop right in front of his favorite person. He had to lean his head all the way back to look into Derek's eyes. Derek looked down to meet the gaze. Nicholas resisted the urge to hug him, and instead clenched at the collar of his shirt.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, that's your room. From how much Nicholas struggled to explain his apology, it was obvious he wasn't at a point where he understood why being together at all times wasn't a completely fantastic idea. All that had gotten through was that he'd upset his brother and that he had in turn upset him. Nicholas bit his lip and moved his hands to pull at the bottom of his shirt instead of the top. The best he could come up with next was simply repeating himself.
Sorry.
Derek's lips quivered just a bit. He patiently listened to his little brother. You should say sorry to him too. Chippy helped you a lot today too. Nicholas instantly twisted his head towards you and echoed the word. He was very serious. Sorry, Chippy. Thank you, Nicholas. Nicholas hopped up on the pads of his feet and as a nervous but hopeful energy came over him. Your reaction was first positive sign he'd gotten. The smallest surges glanced between you and Derek. Unsurely, he let his shirt go and balled his hands into his fist. I'm sorry, Derek. I'm sorry, Chippy. Nicholas put everything he had into willing whatever problem he'd caused to be fixed and into people not feeling bad anymore. The emotional display of regret moved someone in the room to speak.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry too. Why, George? You didn't do anything. Derek snorted a laugh at the unexpectedness of the interaction. What did you even do? I don't know. The middle child looked down at the puzzle in front of him again, but he was staring through the pieces as if they weren't there. He murmured just barely loud enough to hear from where you were standing. You and Chippy had to watch me today too. Derek's hesitantly completely crumbled, and his casual, familiar, dramatic came back in full force.
Aww.
George, you don't have to apologize for that. I like to have some time by myself with my friends, but I never want to stop having my little bros. Nicholas's massively wide eyes sparkled. For the first time since they were reunited, he carefully reached out to Derek and gripped his soaking wet jeans. Derek reached down to gently pat his baby brother's head, as he did probably every day. Neither boy cared that this time the hand was damp. Instead, they both smiled at the other unwaveringly affection. No matter what fissions happened, it was inevitable that it would end that way, because they both loved their family equally and deeply. Another person took a turn to cut in as Mr. Soros woke up with vigor.
Let's race!
Derek, Chippy, let's race. What? Derek chuckled at your confusion and switched his head pat into a full-on hair ruffle. Nicholas giggled excitedly along with his brother. Dad is asking us to play a video game. An old kart racer he likes. Yes, and I will win it. Derek's dad cheerfully tacked that on. It couldn't be forgotten clearly. George could be player 4. Miss Soros was the only one who truly kept her distance during the reconciliation between Derek and Nicholas. But now she joined the rest of the family. When she was close enough to you and Derek to whisper, she pressed a hand to the corner of her mouth and winked conspirately. I'll give Nico an unplugged controller. Derek grinned at that point and shifted into giving the longest strands of Nicholas's hair a friendly tug. But he didn't accept the invite immediately. He included you in the discussion. What do you think, Chippy? It's up to you. He nodded at you and turned to answer his father. All right, let's race. Derek's mom encouraged you and Derek with her words, and Nicholas with her hands, taking him by the shoulders. His time, she wouldn't be letting him get away from her.
Go on.
Go get changed. We'll plug it in so it's ready by the time you're back. Chippy, you're welcome to use my or Mr. Sora's pajamas if Derek doesn't have anything you can borrow. It'll be big, but it's better than nothing. Thanks, Mom. Excuse me. Next move continued to be buoyed by the support of his parents, and he left to go get changed, and while walking as lightly as he could in his wet clothes. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. My allergies is really bothering me. Ugh. You follow the watery footprints he left behind to dry off. Excuse me. He did a quick change, and while you waited with a towel wrapped around you to minimize your clothes dripping. He came out of his room wearing black seats with a matching top. It looks pretty cool now. Now that he wasn't spilling water wherever he went, he offered to get you something to wear. Derek raffled off what kinds of pajamas his family had on hand. He apologized twice for the fact that he was so much shorter than you and had nothing you could fit in. You assured him that it wasn't his fault and you were the only one who chose to get wet when you didn't have an extra pair of your own clothes. Ultimately, you borrowed a button-down PJ shirt and pants from Mr. Suarez. It was extremely baggy, considering the design of it was more proper looking than most other types of PJs. The melted way it looked on you was extra funny. What mattered most was that you were finally warm and dry. Your skin still had lingering goosebumps from your dip in the pool. Derek gave you a friendly thumbs up. He was nothing but polite about your outfit solution. Outfit situation, excuse me. He bundled up a pile of wet clothes and carried them out to the laundry. He spoke over his shoulder as he walked as fast as he could with dripping clothes in his arms. I'll get your stuff back to you next time I visit, okay? Okay. As promised, the Suarez dark purple GameCube was fully connected with 4 controllers plugged in. By the time you and Derek strolled into the living room wearing your new digs, a familiar shout filled the whole room. All was right in the world.
Derek's back!
Yep, Nico, I'm here. Miss Sears was on the carpet, with Nicholas on her left. She already passed him a controller. He was having a blast pressing the clicky buttons, despite the fact that they did nothing except make little noise. George and Mr. Suarez took seats on the couch. George tucked himself closely against his father, so the two were only taking up one side. The other half of the couch was reserved for you and Derek. Derek drove into the spot next to George. He spotted he settled in nicely against the plush back of the couch and folded his legs up across the cushion. You got in the final place and relaxed against the armrest. George passed one of the controller to Derek, which Derek gave to you. Then he handed over a second, which Derek kept. Mr. Suarez filled you in on this decision, and he and his second son had made.
What do you think?
Junior and I are on a team, and you and Chippy can play together. What do you think? Derek tilted his head on your way. He lifted his shoulders and added on to his dad's briefly. It's a double racer. One drives, the other controls items. Now this is going to be good. Definitely. It's me and you then. The deal was settled and packs had been made. George perked up and shook Mr. Suarez's arm. Hey Dad, we're Team Suarez. Yes, we are. Derek's fingers were on the buttons, and he was leaning over his crossed legs in anticipation for the game to begin. He replied, unbothered. Cool for you guys. With his gaze still glued on the TV, a cheeky grin pulled at his lips. Derek spoke one more thing under his breath that was meant for just him, but you were sitting close enough to still catch it. I don't mind being Team Prince. He giggled sweetly, being squished into the couch so close to him felt even warmer. All four players making up the two teams chose their characters, carts, positions, and the track set to start. Derek and Mr. Suarez were driving you, and George had item launching duty. 3, 2, 1. The carts launch across the starting lines, with both drivers getting an extra boost. Team Prince and Team Soares were off down the colorful jungle road. There would be 3 laps before the race was over. Lap 1 was a frantic race for the top spot. The carts were neck and neck to each other over every hill and around each curve, neither getting ahead or falling behind. Attacks were constantly exchanged and buttons were pressed at rapid speeds. That concluded Nicholas as he watched the race and tried to use his controller the way everyone else was. He wondered which part of the game he thought he was impacting. By lap 2, Team Prince had taken a strong lead. Almost nothing from the Soares camp could reach your cart. Once he passed the line to start the lap, Derek was cocky enough to bring out the smack talk. I thought you were going to win, Dad. Mrs. Soares' expression was perfectly content. More than that, it was serene. And it was with that calm face Derek's father carefully reached across George, and then in a blink of an eye locked his large hand around captively tiny controller Derek held.
Ah!
Hey. The cart you and Derek shared went out of control, carrying off the dirt, cleaning off the dirt path to a pit. You had to wait for the game to fish you out of the place. You back on the road. Team Soares rolled on past.
See?
See, I'm winning now. Derek's dad was boldly apologetic. He grinned like a child who just found out you could get in the hole and win at putt-putt golf if you just dropped the ball in the hole. You're cheating now. Derek spluttered with laughter made of equal parts of amusement and disbelief. He yanked his arms towards his chest to fight for freedom, but Mr. Soares' grip was unmovable. We're running interference, huh? From a distance, Miss Soares mused over the situation that had begun to unfold. Her husband stole a look at where she'd been sitting. She was gone, leaving only Nicholas on the floor. Miss Soares lifted one thick eyebrow and pressed the other lower. He could only puzzle over what might mean until it all came clear by the world going dark for only him. Derek's mom had crawled over behind the couch, popped up from behind, and slipped her fingers under Mr. Sora's glasses. He was caught completely off guard.
Ah!
His father started from the shock of surprise attack wasn't complimented by himself. Committed by himself. Sorry about that. Yeah, Mom. And yay, Mom. Derek hadn't gotten his controller back. Mr. Soros was stubborn in his hold, but his dad was just as incapacitated as a driver. Sorry about that. My allergies are at its worst today for some reason. Sorry. Yeah, Mom. An echo of Derek's chair came from behind. All excitement in the air had stared a fire in Nicholas. He wasn't just playing with an off controller anymore. He crawled on all fours at the rapid pace until he reached the couch and launched himself right at Dad's stomach. It was powerful enough that Mr. Soros sprung forward and Mr. Soros' hands were yanked off of him. Oof. But Derek's controller was finally freed. Mr. Soros had to let go of both controllers to catch his squirming child. Nicholas would not be contained. He climbed over his dad's shoulders and wrapped his arms around Mr. Soros' face. In sweet justice, the Team Soros cart flew off the bridge into the abyss below. Yeah, Nicholas. George placed his own controller on his lap with a shake of his head and a smirk. Team Soros wasn't winning this race. Derek rolled his shoulders and poked a tongue out of the corner of his mouth. In concentration, he was back in business. The Team Prince cart course corrected and the race towards the finish line of the final lap. The youngest Soros hugged all four of his limbs around Dad even tighter from the thrill of seeing Derek speed his car around the track. Yeah. Items weren't needed now, but you were just as invested in watching your cart make the last stretch. Your Derek brought it home, crossing the finish line. We won. Derek threw his fist into the air, pumped them back into his chest, and turned to you with a palm held out for you to smash. I'm gonna give him a hug. You hugged him. You ignored the hand and flung your arms around his neck. He squeezed you back, pressing his face into your shoulder. You were victorious. We won. Nicholas sent his arms up towards the sky, a perfect imitation of his eldest brother. Mr. Soares used the opportunity to collect his son from off his shoulders and placed Nicholas into his lap. He pet his son's hair and laughed, breathlessly, but full of joy.
Okay.
I lost. Next race. This time Derek repeated the phrase, still raring to go. But that was naturally followed by an original copycat. Nichols clapped gleefully and snuggled up against his seat on his father's chest. Next race. George picked up his abandoned controller once more. His voice was quieter, but no less sincere.
Yeah.
Yeah, next race. In all the commotion, you'd completely forgotten you could have switched to the driver role to take over for Derek at any time. George could have too for his dad, but you were glad it went the way it did. Team Prince got its win with the assistance of Team Pile drivers Nicholas and Miss Soares. And the game was just getting started. Next race. You couldn't help joining in doing the pattern. It got big smiles from the family.
Well.
Now that this is a real party, there's still pizza in the fridge. Who wants leftovers? The suggestion of food riled Nicholas up even more. He climbed over his dad's shoulders for the second time, tugging on his beard and accidentally knocking his glasses off. Mr. Soares wheezed out a chuckle. Nichols started out from over the couch into the kitchen. He wanted that pizza, but couldn't be the first to ask. Pizza, please.
Same.
Me too. George and Mr. Soares chimed in their own request.
Sure.
Can I have some, Mom? I would like some pizza. My beloved wife, who never turns against me. She snickered with a glint in her eyes. Of course, start the game, I'll heat it up. All four of the servicemen spoke in unison. Thanks, Mom. Thank you, too.
You're welcome.
The players all resumed their positions and took up their tools, silently sweating GameCube controllers. When the second race started, the grin on Derek's face was one of the most radiant you'd seen in the whole day. His dad, mom, and brothers too really knew how to make Derek happy. That brought a smile to your face too. From getting a window into Derek's life, and from what you knew from your own, spending every day with the same people could take a lot of patience, but there were a lot of perks too. Your time at Sarah's household ended with family, food, and fun. There wasn't much more you could have asked for. Yep, and that's the end of it. So I'm going to go ahead and save. That was a long moment too, long story moment. I'll save it right there. So thanks again for watching on my YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button for those of you who haven't done so already. And don't forget to check out my Patreon account and please become a Patreon contributing member. Remember, you will be helping out the community of charities that need the funds. And you can find the link to my Patreon within the description area just below this video. So on my next recording, we'll be back on Camp Buddy Scoutmaster season with the Aiden route, and hopefully I'll be able to download these videos. I'm not sure how much longer I have suspension. I think I only have like maybe 2 weeks of suspension from downloading because of because I got what do you call it? I got red flagged, or we'll just put it that way. I got red flagged on a past video, which got they took it down. So I have to be more careful about the videos I put on here. I think that in order to do that, I'm gonna have to probably skim through them first before I actually record them to make sure where the uncensored parts is, so I can get past that. When I do the recording, I know where they are, and then I can, stop it before the uncensored parts. Because sometimes the uncensored parts just pop out of nowhere, so gotta be careful. And I don't need to get any more bad marks from YouTube, because I don't want to lose my channel. I mean, I could lose my channel if I'm not careful. So we don't want that. So anyway, until next time, I will see you guys later.